Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today is March 12th and the audio should be working now. I did notice in the chat box a couple people were saying about the audio. It should be working now, but if it's not, please let me know in the chat box. Today's webinar instructor is going to be Vince Franco, and today we're going to talk about updates to Davis-Bacon and related acts. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center. Today, I will be your webinar facilitator. Before we get started, I just want to tell you a quick disclaimer. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. All right, before we get started, I'll show you how you can use the environment. If you look at the top of your screen, you will see a hand. With that hand, you can either raise hand, agree, disagree, applaud, laugh, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to the graphic here. To the bottom left, you will see a box that says Files. Here you will find any handouts or appendix items included in today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Simply click that item you would like to download, then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save onto your device. Once the item is downloaded, it should appear on your device's download section. The second box labeled Web Links is where you will find our survey about today's webinar, along with the link to join our email list and any other links that will be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, to the right of the screen, we have a chat box available. This is how you will communicate with the instructor and NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. Simply type your message and hit enter or click that up arrow icon button to submit. We do encourage class participation, so please feel free to write in those questions or comments. Tech support issues should also be submitted here. Know that most can be solved by exiting and re-entering the meeting room. Let's all try out the chat box together now by typing in your name and where you are joining us from and your tribal affiliation. And it is with a pleasure that I now introduce Vince Franco.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. As Awista was saying, please feel free to put your name, if you like, in the chat box, as she had suggested. Any information is helpful. Also, while you're at it, if you're going to put something in the chat box, give me an idea. If you're familiar with Davis-Bacon and related acts, the Davis-Bacon Act that's been around since the Nixon administration. If you're at all familiar with that, it gives me kind of an idea of the kind of the knowledge level of the group and helps me to kind of calibrate the discussion and the information that I'm going to be presenting. It's very, very helpful. And as she also said, if you have any questions or comments during the information, very, very open to any suggestions or questions you have. In fact, I like it that way, prefer it that way. If instead of waiting to the end of the presentation, if you do have a question or concern, put it in the chat box and I will do my best to try to answer or at least give some insight or send you in the right direction. The other thing I want to stress here is there's a lot of information that's going to be presented during this, and I don't want you in any way, shape, or form to be overwhelmed by the amount of information. Like most presentations, whether they be webinars or face-to-face encounters, you're going to have questions tomorrow, next week, next month, 6 months from now, or somewhere down the road when all of a sudden you're thinking about Davis-Bacon regulations. I don't know who would be randomly thinking about it, but you may be in that situation. Feel free, if that is to occur, feel free to reach out to the Native Learning Center if you have a question. What'll happen is they will forward the question to me. You don't have to worry about getting my email address and all that type of thing. If you have a question, you can always send it to any of the contacts at the Native Learning Center. I know they work very, very closely together. They will forward those kind of questions to the subject matter expert that they have at their disposal. When it comes to Davis-Bacon, it probably would be sent my way as it would if we were talking about updates to the uniform guidance, the federal guidelines. And now that I've said that, there are some updates to the federal guidelines, the uniform guidance, that will have some overlap into the Davis-Bacon regulations. So when we come into that situation, I'll be sure to mention what's happening there. Just taking a look at the chat box here, keeping my right eye on the chat box, and also watching the screen and making sure we're moving along. So let's just do that. We've got a lot of material to cover. As the screenshot showed you, the very first slide here, we're going to be talking primarily about Davis-Bacon legislation that's been around for a number of years. It's not updated very often. There was a change. As you can see, final rule was put out on August 10th, 2023. So I'm going to present that information today. So let's move right into it. A little bit about me and my company. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. Training session provides a review of what's called the final rule by the Office of Management and Budget. Well, in this case, Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division, who oversees Davis-Bacon legislation in the form of prevailing wage. Their final rules that came out in the Federal Register. If you're not familiar, the Federal Register is kind of the government's go-to document, either online or hardline version of the most recent regulations. Not just Davis-Bacon, but all of them. On August 10th, 2023, not too long ago, came out the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor came out with the revised version of what was called, or what is called, the Davis-Bacon and Related Acts, or DBRA is the acronym. And what you see in front of you is the information, the course agenda. I'm going to stop here for a second, make sure we're okay. Okay, just checking the chat box because I know someone said they couldn't hear me. Just double checking that. What you see in front of you is the agenda. We're going to take it in 4 parts today. Part 1, review and some resources that are available. I like to use, and you'll see this coming up in the next few slides, what's referred to as QR codes. I love the QR codes. If you got a smartphone, as you know, or some of you know, you take a picture of it. It takes you directly in real time to the source of the information. So this presentation is peppered with QR codes to different, what I consider to be different links. So in part 1, we'll talk about kind of an overview including some of those resources. In part 2, more in the overview, definition and applicability. As you can see, overview, definition, role of the grantee, that would be you, the recipient, using federal funds, and the types of construction and wage determinations. We'll get into that. Part 3 also. Today we'll put together, or I've put together, what's called a side-by-side analysis of what the regulations are now and what they are, how they've changed. I almost said the word proposed. They're not proposed. They're actually in a final form. So these are changes that have been put in place. And then lastly, part 4 there, the role of compliance and how important that is in making sure that we're doing everything as the Office of Management and Budget says when it puts out its uniform guidance. They like to use the frame reasonable assurance, which means to the best of our ability. They actually use that term in the super circular, in the 2 CFR Part 200, which is the uniform guidance, which gives us all of our, the bulk of our federal regulations. They use that frame, reasonable assurance, which means to the best of our ability. that's what we're going to be doing here today, is trying to go over the federal regulations as they pertain to Davis-Bacon legislation and think through how this would have an effect for us at a tribal level, and how we could put some of these changes in place. The really good news about the updates to the Davis-Bacon is most of the updates are superficial. They're really not major earth-moving, significant changes. Most of them are kind of subtle changes, geographical changes in the way that they've calculated metropolitan areas to calculate or to better represent tribes and other organizations that use federal funds that qualify for Davis-Bacon legislation. More representation. So the changes are kind of embedded in the program. They're minor for the most part. You're not going to see any radical changes. That's good news, and it's very different from the changes that are being proposed now to the uniform guidance, as I kind of alluded to before. Those major regulations, the federal regulations, referred to as the uniform guidance, 2 CFR Part 200, those are out for public comment right now, and there are some major changes in that particular set of regulations. So I'm sorry, my screen went black for a half second there. All right, so again, keeping an eye on the chat box. And I hope you can get that sound situation worked out. Sometimes you got to go back out of the program and come back in. Okay, part 1, resources. As I mentioned before, a lot of QR codes and some links here, what I consider to be very, very critical, important things. If you got a smartphone, in fact, I got my phone here right in front of me. I'm gonna, just like you, I'm gonna check and make sure that that QR code is live. I'm literally gonna take a picture of it on the screen, my screen. Yep, took me to Davis-Bacon related acts. So hopefully it works for you. That one on the top right is a QR code, as it says in the green box next to it, to the Davis-Bacon and Required Acts Wage and Hour Division, and the information on the changes to Davis-Bacon and Required Acts. The one below it is, let's take a picture of that too. And as the green box says next to it, it should be the link to the actual final rule. Let's go there. Let's see where it takes me. Final rule updating Davis-Bacon and relating acts. Looks very similar to the first one, but those are two very, very important links and information on Davis-Bacon. I suggest that you look into that a little bit, do a deeper dive. And here are more links, more QR codes that should take you to Department of Labor regulations. Department of Labor top right. What you'll be wanting to look at is 29 CFR Part 1, 2, and 3. Those are the 3 sections that pertain to Davis-Bacon. In particular, Title 29, 3, Part 3, and I should add Part 5 in there as well. Part 5 is got quite a bit of information on Davis-Bacon. It's broken into several subparts, but those are the QR code links to the different areas. The one in the middle, procedures for predetermination of wage rates, and on the bottom, contractors and subcontractors on public building and public works. 3 more valuable resource areas and QR codes for your record. I would strongly suggest that when we're done here, if you can, here's another one here, the HUD handbook, which I don't think has changed recently, issued January 23rd. That's the QR code from it. If you have not downloaded that, I suggest that you do it. If you are recipients of Indian Housing Block Grant funds. If you're a TDHE, a tribally determined housing entity, housing department, you want to have this document. If you're receiving Indian Housing Block Grant funds, which are federal funds, and you're thinking about or doing construction-related or rehabilitation work more than $2,000, very low dollar threshold, then you're gonna trip the trigger, so to speak, to be required to follow Davis-Bacon. This handbook is very, very valuable document. If you've never seen any of these documents, I recommend that you download this presentation when we're done here, and download these documents to your phone, to your laptop, to your desktop. Keep them handy if you haven't done that already. Print them out if you wish. The HUD handbook is a rather large document, so you might want to be careful with that one when it comes to printing. But I always do that, when I come across these documents, whether they are related to Davis-Bacon or they're related to the Uniform Guidance or Indian Housing Block Grant Funds or whatever it might be. I always like to have, or NAHASDA, I always like to have a hard copy version of all of that, an electronic version and also a hard copy version. And I'll share one thing with you when it comes to searching for these documents. I like to go to a search engine that the federal government puts up, and that is ecfr.gov. Small e, CFR as in Code of Federal Regulation.gov. If you're looking to access particularly regulations, that would be my recommendation of choice, simply because the way that they lay the information out, none of the information is changed, of course. That would be probably a felony, but it's laid out more in a narrative format instead of some of the other formats that are available, like the Federal Register format is like reading a very small newspaper. ecfr.gov lays out this information in more of a narrative style. It's very, very easy. It's more reader friendly and a lot easier to navigate and find information. So that's what I use as a search engine for looking for these things. So let's keep going on. Couple more links here. Excuse me, QR codes for Prevailing Wage Resource Book, another valuable document, and Labor Relations Desk Copy. Two more excellent resources to have at your disposal. All right, always good to have as many resources as possible, right? Whether we're talking about the federal regulations, which is kind of what we're doing here, legislation, regulations, all of those things. It's good to have good working copies, and these are excellent sources. All right. So that is part one. Actually, we wanted to make sure you were aware of these resources that are out there pertaining to Davis-Bacon and pertaining to the federal regulations as well, not just the Davis-Bacon legislation, but the federal regulations as a whole. Where to go, using the QR codes as ways to bring you in real time to the source. Like I said before, I really like the QR codes because they are, with a click of, you don't have to do anything with your phone other than bring up your camera and on your phone, and it takes you right there to the site. And I really enjoy that. So we talked about, in this first section, just some resources that are available for you to have basically at your fingertips. I think always is going to say that after about 24 hours, this presentation, so it's today, Tuesday, by tomorrow afternoon, perhaps Thursday at the latest, this presentation will be available for downloading. I think you can actually download the files to the bottom left of your screen and use the web links in the center in real time. But the presentation itself, the PowerPoint slides here, will be available in a couple of days. I strongly recommend that you go back to the nativelearningcenter.com, go to the Catheta online link on the homepage, find this presentation, this PowerPoint presentation, and the voiceover that comes with it, and download it and keep it, and print it out if you can, and use those QR codes and those resources if you're not aware, if you don't have them already, as really good resources, and put that all together as part of your package for dealing with construction related issues, and in particular Davis-Bacon legislation. And you do know, I hope you do know, that Davis-Bacon is the legislation. Davis-Bacon and required acts are just that. That's the law, the legislation that was put into effect back in the early 70s under the Nixon administration. It's changed a little bit over the years, not a whole lot. And under the Davis-Bacon legislation, there's a lot of different issues, but the one issue that we need to be aware of is the requirement for prevailing wage and certified payroll records. If we are put in a situation where we are required to use the Davis-Bacon, as it's referred to, Davis-Bacon for our construction or rehabilitation projects, then we need to be aware what those regulations are and where the changes are. Make sense? All right, we're going to keep going here. Part 2, overview, definition, applicability. Overview and definition, applicability, role of the grantee, that's you, types of construction and wage determination. Okay, let's keep going on. Stop me again. If you have questions or concerns, stop me, and put up a question. I'm more than happy to deal with that. We talked about that, and here we are delving into part 2 now, overview and definition. Under Davis-Bacon and related acts, which is what it's called these days, here's some important formation information. Plan 14, 1950. This is where it all kind of came from. Department of Labor back in the day. DOL Department of Labor issue regulations and standards to be observed by federal agencies. A lot of times the federal agencies get the marching orders. Well, they usually get the marching orders from either the Department of Labor in this case or the Office of Management and Budget. You've probably heard of OMB. OMB is basically the organization that creates all the federal guidelines for all the federal programs, including what we're going to be talking about today. And as I mentioned, there are some significant changes being proposed in the federal regulations that will have an impact to some effect on Davis-Bacon. The bottom bullet there on your screenshot says Department of Labor also oversees the consistent enforcement of Davis-Bacon labor standards. They are going to want to make sure that we are doing everything and that your contractor is doing everything with reasonable assurance under the guidelines of the Davis-Bacon legislation, under the guidelines and regulations of prevailing wage and certified payroll records and all the things that come with Davis-Bacon. So, all right, keep going. I'm just looking at, if I pause, I'm just looking at the chat box. That's all I'm doing. Davis-Bacon required DBR. I'm just going to kind of call it DBRA as we progress through the program here. Apply to contractors, subcontractors performing on federally funded or assisted contracts in excess of $2,000, which is a very, very low dollar threshold in my estimate. $2,000 is easy, a very low, easy to reach threshold that would signify that you are required to follow Davis-Bacon legislation, prevailing wage, etc. It's not a very high threshold. It's very easy to meet that $2,000 for construction or alterations or repairs, as it says there, using federal funds, including the Indian Housing Block Grant, IHBG, and most other federal funding that's used in any way, shape, or form for construction or alteration related projects. DBRA contractors, your general contractor, for example, and his or her subs, must pay their laborers and mechanics. And if they're using apprentices would fall into that as well. And, some contractors have apprentices that they use on the job. So you'd have to put them in the mix. But as it says, they're laborers and mechanics, aka journey level construction workers. Journey, you've heard that phrase before, I'm sure, journey or journeyman or mechanic level. In other words, they're not apprentices and they're not laborers, which is a category all in itself for construction. They are at a journey, what's referred to as a journey level or mechanics level. It's hard to think of as a carpenter as being a mechanic, but you could look at it as a carpenter as being a journeyman or journeywoman. All right, that phrase. So mechanic is an interchangeable word with journey level qualification. So that the feds use that word mechanic in lieu of journey person throughout. So don't be confused thinking that a mechanic is just someone who works on a car. No, we're not talking that. We're talking about construction related trades, carpenters, plumbers, sheet metal workers, electricians, roofers, laborers, apprentices in any of those positions, heavy equipment operators, crane operators, and probably a slew of others that I can't just think of off the top of my head. Sheet metal workers, all of those can be at the mechanics or journey level position, and that's what we're talking about. So if you hear me use the word mechanic, that would be rare. I like to use the phrase journeyman or journeywoman because in my mind, being coming out of the construction association work for a number of years, that makes sense to me. We have laborers, we have apprentices, and then we have journey level people. Okay, and to finish it, it says to pay these individuals under the Davis-Bacon legislation no less than what's locally referred to or what's generally referred to as the prevailing wage and the fringe benefits that correspond to the position. The carpenter, the mechanic, the carpenter, the plumber, the sheet metal worker, the roofer, whatever. That's the prevailing wage. Basically, you can think of it, if this is new to you, think of it kind of as the union scale, the union wages, which tend to be higher at a higher rate than what's commonly referred to as the open shop or merit shop or competitive shop, or even the tribal, in some cases, wage rates. The prevailing wage tends to be is basically a higher wage rate and a higher fringe benefit rate, probably even at a higher percentage of the base salary. So you can kind of look at prevailing wage. You'll hear that phrase throughout Davis-Bacon verbiage. Prevailing wage basically means the union rates. That's kind of what, in comparison, that's kind of the way I look at it sometimes. Excuse me again as my screen went black again. Okay, keep moving on and keeping my eye on the chat box, hoping things are working out over there. Thank you, EWONAP, for all the technical support. And NLC provides marvelous technical support. Trust me when I say that. They are there to help to the best of their ability with reasonable assurance to make sure all these things fall into place. All right, federal labor standards, general purpose to ensure proper payment of prevailing wage to not only laborers, but to the apprentices that I was talking about and to the mechanics or journey level, basically everyone that falls under the umbrella of Davis-Bacon. And that's pretty much going to be every laborer under that works on the projects. Summary of requirements there. Wages are paid at least once a week, premium pay for overtime, and unauthorized deductions are prohibited. It's pretty, it's well, how do I phrase this? It's well supervised. There's a lot of requirements. You really need to be up to speed on Davis-Bacon legislation, prevailing wage, and the whole thing, and what the prevailing wage is in the state that you're in the county, even in the municipality, based on the trade that you have, because it's all going to be different. A carpenter working on a job in our neck of the woods down here in Southeast Florida, in Broward County, which is Fort Lauderdale, And let's say even in the municipality of Hollywood, which is where the Native Learning Center is located, again, near Fort Lauderdale, those rates are going to be considerably different than a carpenter doing the same work in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, which is center, that's Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Those rates, same job, same skill sets, but different rate of prevailing wage based on the state, based on the county, the city, even the municipality. And those rates, of course, are going to be very different from your big city rates in New York and Philadelphia, Chicago, Las Vegas, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Those are all big union towns, union construction, and the rates are going to be higher to start with. So, and higher cost of living in those places too, higher everything. So again, wages paid once a week. Those are your certified payroll records that have to be done, premium pay for overtime, and a lot more. That's kind of just a prelude into what we're getting into. Here's more technical information for you. The Davis-Bacon Act from back in the day. Davis-Bacon Act, 40 USC Chapter 3. That's where it all actually is documented. Its origin, so to speak, requires some of the original legislation required payment of prevailing wage as determined by the Department of Labor. That has not changed. Provides for fair opportunity to compete in building programs. Hold on a second. Okay, Ann's got a good question. Let me just pause here for a second. If we do not have tribally designated wage rates and we have to hire a contractor, will the contractor know what the prevailing wage is or what we are responsible for? Good question. I would lean more towards they don't know. We cannot count what Anna is describing here is a situation where the tribe does not have tribally determined wages. So they've got to rely on, on Davis-Bacon, on the prevailing wage. They've got to go out. They've got to probably use a sealed bid process to get a general contractor. Her question is, do we think the contractor will have knowledge of the rates? I would venture to say it depends. They probably don't. They probably don't know what the wage rate, at least that's the way I would approach it. You've got, as the recipient of the federal funds, you have the fiduciary responsibility, of course, for handling your federal funds. Even when it comes to Davis-Bacon, that money flows through you to the general contractor. So ultimately, you as the recipient are responsible, right? You're responsible to making sure Davis-Bacon works properly. I would go under the assumption that they do not know what those specific rates are. You're going to have to find out what they are anyway, because you're going to have make sure that either they or you have them posted on the job site, because it has to be common knowledge what the rates are. So you're probably going to have to take it upon yourself to go to the Department of Labor, the prevailing wage division, find out what the rates are for the carpenters, plumbers, electricians, heavy equipment operators, et cetera, for the county you're in. Print that out, get that a bit so you know what the base rate is and what the fringe rate is, and have that posted on the job site. It has to be posted on the job site in a prevalent area where everyone can see, including the workers. They have to be able to see. Lisa says if it can suggest, it's best to include the bid document with a lock-in date. Apologize. Yeah, right, correct. Sorry, things are scrolling quickly. With the lock-in date wage rates on SAM.gov. Okay, correct. Thank you, Lisa. Can the tribe use its own public works employees on HUD construction projects and pay them prevailing wage rates? That's a really good question. If you've got prevailing wage rates, if the tribe has tribally determined rates, I think you've got to go with what your tribal rates are, even if they may be more higher than what the prevailing wage rate might be. I think I'll have to double check on that one, but I think that's the case, that the tribally determined rates oversee or supersede, if you have them, what the prevailing wage is. And to be honest with you, there's not a lot of tribes out there that I'm aware of, and I've been to a lot of them, who have tribally determined wage rates for construction. Most of them don't. I don't think Seminole Tribe of Florida does. In fact, I know they don't, because when the Native Learning Center went to make improvements to its bricks and mortar building, we had to go out through a sealed bid process and get a general contractor. So, you know, good question. Those are excellent questions, but not many tribes have prevailing wage rates tribally determined. Generally applies to, we talked about this, the $2,000 is that threshold. Contracts for the following types of work: construction, alteration, repair, painting, and decorating. Can't see if it goes on anymore. No other labor laws. Other thing. Now this slide talks about other things that are included in the Davis-Bacon and related acts. The Contractors Hour Safety Standards Act, basically the OSHA here, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, plays a part in this. The Copeland Kickback Act, that came out of the 70s, and the Fair Labor Standard Act. Those are all integrated and rolled in to Davis-Bacon and required acts. HUD programs also, if you're using HUD funds like Indian Housing Block Grant, HUD programs also require the tribes, you got to have written competitive procurement. Of course, that's one of your internal controls that's mandated by federal guidelines. The uniform guidance says you've got to have internal controls, including policies and procedures for procurement. And your procurement should include sealed bid and competitive procurement, and all of these other things as well. Small business, women business, enterprise, all of those are suggested as areas that we should be looking at as part of our procurement process. Of course, insurance and bonding, both for you and of course for the contractor. Okay, applicability, still in part 2 here. Keeping an eye in the chat box. I know you got some questions and scenarios coming up, and most of them so far have been able to kind of address without getting, once we get into the realm of being very, very specific to a tribe and the unique situations that you might have, that takes a little more deeper dive sometimes. I might have to do a little bit of research when it comes to some of those very unique situations, but please put them out there. If don't feel bad or worried about it. Put it out there. If we can address it, we certainly will address it. Okay, determining DBRA applicability is one of the most challenging, not so much determining it, but just staying on top of it and making sure you understand all the moving parts associated with the Davis-Bacon Act, the prevailing wage, certified payroll records, and your role as a grantee, federal grantee, and the role that you play in it. Not so much determining, are we eligible, are we not eligible? It's got a relatively low dollar threshold, so it's easy to qualify for that. It's, I think, personally, from a compliance background, it's much more time worthy and time sensitive, just staying on top of it, making sure, because there's a little bit of a risk here, a little bit of a loss of control, because you're counting on the general contractor for the most part to be, to do things properly. They need to be educated, if they're not already, on what Davis-Bacon requirements are. So there has to be, from your standpoint, there has to be involvement with these outside contractors to make sure they understand not only what the wage rate and fringe benefits are for the different trades, but the responsibility that they have because of your responsibility as the steward of these federal funds. They are pass-through entities receiving federal funds. You play a part of the compliance team here. You've got to make sure that the contractor understands and is doing everything within the parameters of Davis-Bacon, paying on a weekly basis, making sure that they're not only paying the proper rate, but that the payroll records are being signed off on and are flowing back through you as the compliance person, as the recipient of the federal funds, to get your eyes on it and perhaps even a sign off on it from a compliance standpoint. That's what I did. I signed off on all the certified payroll records after they were signed off by the general contractor. So to make sure that everything fell within the compliance standards and the policies and procedures that the Native Learning Center had, Seminole Tribe of Florida had for the program. You're going to be doing the same thing. The grantee, that's you, must understand your funding program triggers. You know, when based on productivity and type, when do you qualify? Qualify, again, it's probably the wrong word. You don't qualify for Davis-Bacon. You reach a threshold where you are mandated to use, for most cases, unless you have your own tribally determined wage, you are mandated to use Davis-Bacon. So qualifying is I apologize for using that word. I don't want to mislead you. And you know, it's not that kind of way. You didn't win the lottery. You didn't qualify for, you know, some kind of windfall. You've reached a threshold where you become responsible for making sure that the federal funds that you're using and flowing through that general contractor are indeed being forwarded to the recipients, that would be the construction workers, based on the proper prevailing wage for the trades, for the state, the county, the municipality, the trade activity, and the type of job that's being done. You play a part in that. So those certified payroll records that the general contractor is signing off on need to jive with the posted rates that are on the job site for everyone to see, and that needs to flow through you. Let me take 1 minute to tell you a little bit of a horror story, a personal story of myself before I was working with tribes way back in the day, before I started working with the Native Learning Center. I want to talk about 25 years ago, or even more, when I was with a construction trade association that was based out of Washington, D.C. Now, the chapter for that construction trade association that I worked with was out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and had contractor members, mostly open shop, merit shop across the country, or across Pennsylvania, which include Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and everything in between. Well, all the companies in between were open shop and merit shop, and those in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, as you imagine, were union shops. But regardless, we had a lot of contractors that did public work. They worked on schools, for example, and a lot of them had apprentices, and they had, you know, they were working on it. They were, in this case, they were the recipient of, they were forced to do Davis-Bacon on those public works. They usually didn't like doing it because for them it included much more paperwork, which, you know, just comes with the territory. But we ran an apprenticeship program, and we had a situation where the contractor was not paying the apprentice on the job, supposed to be prevailing wage for a carpenter, was not paying the proper rate for an apprentice, which is a percentage of the journeyman's rate on that, and was not doing it based on his level of experience. He was a third-year apprentice out of a 4-year program. He should have been at the 75 to 80% of the journeyman carpenter's prevailing wage for the job. He was nowhere near that. He was being paid a fraction of it, and the kid knew it. He knew that because the amounts were posted on the job site. You talk about a perfect storm. The kid knew that he was being underpaid. He filed a grievance. He filed a grievance with the contractor, who ignored it, but he also filed a grievance with the grantee, the recipient. That was us, and we took it seriously. And what we were forced to do was hold court. We had to bring the general contractor in as a member of the organization. The kid, the worker, came in as well. It wasn't a kid, he was in his 20s, but had to bring him in, and we had to actually facilitate the version of a court hearing. Long story short, the kid was right, the contractor was wrong. The contractor was forced to pay retroactive salary, wages, and fringe benefits based on the difference of what it should have been to that worker all the way back to the start of the contract. It was tens of thousands of dollars. The kid made out, he was brought up to where he should have been, and the contractor, well, that's a whole nother story of what happened to the contractor. But I guess my point here as the recipient, as the grantee, we are to very much extent, we are responsible for that, making sure with no assumptions being made that we can count on the contractor to understand all the parameters of Davis-Bacon. That's our job as compliance people and as the recipient of the federal funds, to make sure we understand. That's why you're here today. That was my role in it when I did it, with the Native Learning Center, making sure that everyone understood, the contractor, the subcontractors, and all of the workers understood what the parameters of this meant, the big picture. Okay, bottom of the screen is grantees must administer and enforce labor standards. This is the time sometimes you have to put on the hat of the compliance officer. You have fiduciary responsibility, you and your organization, your tribe or tribal entity, to make sure that the contractor is doing what they are supposed to do, because you're ultimately responsible. Okay, it's as simple as that. You just have to take ownership of it and make no assumptions that your contractors and the laborers that work for, whether they're labor level or journey level or apprentice, understand the parameters. This is all a teachable moment, and we've got to hold them responsible like we hold ourselves responsible. Because trust me, HUD's going to hold us responsible, and other organizations that we receive federal funds for that we can use for funding of Davis-Bacon acts. We're going to be held responsible during our audits and during our program review. So we've got to make sure we're protecting the program. You've got to have policies and procedures in place and internal controls that protect you and protect the program, and that require all the things that I've been talking about so far should be in your policies and procedures. The sealed bid, the competitive procurement process to get a contractor if you're going that route, following your internal controls. Because if I were an auditor and I came to your location of business, your tribal entity, you're using federal funds, whether or not you're in the Davis-Bacon realm or not, the first thing I'm going to ask you is for your internal controls, your policies and procedures. And you better have something in there of how you deal with Davis-Bacon situations, how you enforce the standards, how you monitor the progress, how you evaluate your success of the program. You must have internal policies and procedures in place. So it behooves you to understand what we're doing here and ask questions when you need to, and enforce the program. Okay, what did I skip over one? Okay, apply. Apparently I did. Applies, several areas: residential, building, small. We're not talking huge buildings. We're talking basically less than 5 stories, but heavy building too, heavy highway to some extent. That's the bottom one there. Infrastructure. There's a lot of areas where Davis-Bacon has application. Got a quick trigger finger. Okay, definition. Wage determination is a list of wages. I went through this. And fringe benefits, that you can go to the wage and hour division of Department of Labor, and you can find in real time what the rate of pay is for any construction trade, what the rate of pay and what the fringe is for prevailing wage for the area. And if you're in the realm of Davis-Bacon, those are the wages primarily, that with few exceptions, those are going to be the wages and fringe benefit rates that have to be paid for the respective construction related workers on the job, depending upon their trade, and the state and the county, and even in some cases the municipality, especially in large geographical areas. Okay, just making sure everyone's audio is working. Very good. General wage determination reflects what the prevailing wages. I told you basically how to get there. Department of Labor, Division of Wage, And salaries, that's where we go. Wage and hour, I'm sorry, wage and hour. Salaries is something different. Wage and hours, that's where these rates live. And you can search by trade and state and all of those different things. Okay. Case by base cases, yes. Okay. HUD, www.dol.gov, Department of Labor. You can go there. There's a QR code a couple slides back. If you haven't been there, I would suggest that you do so. Okay. Doing well. All right, here's a just a screenshot. Hopefully you can see some definition in this screenshot. Wage at top left there, it says wage determination online.gov. This is something provided by the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division. You see the red arrow, downward red arrow in the middle. It's pointing to DBA wage determinations. That's what WD stands for. Wage determinations. You click on that particular link and it should take you to a scrolling chart. I don't know. I don't think it's on the next slide. Oh, yeah, it is. This is what you would see. Very good. This is what you would see if as you're looking for specific wage determinations for a trade. And basically what you're looking for down there is at the bottom. It says by selection criteria beginning with, and you can select that first box as a drop-down menu where you can select the trade, or I'm sorry, the state that you're looking for. Okay. And then below that is the county, because I think hopefully you can see like I can. It says Florida for the state, and below that it says Broward. That's the Fort Lauderdale, the county that Fort Lauderdale's in, for example. And then below that, it has the construction type. So here we're not getting into municipalities. Here it's just state and county, which is great. Okay. And then below that, we got our construction type, which is the residential, commercial, heavy highway, that type of thing, your 4 categories, and probably some others. And then from there, let's see if it gets next. There we go. Now we get into the actual wages. Now this screenshot, don't use this as gospel. This screenshot is at least a couple months old, but it shows you how you can work through the process if you've never done it before, going to the Department of Labor, going through the Wage and Hour Division, finding the trade, looking for the state and county, like in the prior slide, state and county, and the type of work that you'll be doing. So if you're a housing entity, primarily it's going to be housing, construction, and then it'll take you here, which will give you, if you can see that, it's a scroll down menu where that red drop down arrow, downward facing arrow is. But it's a scroll down of all the different trades and the rate. I think that would be the number there. The first number you see is the hourly rate, and that one happens to be touching the carpenter at $21.17 per hour. And then to the right of that would be fringe benefits. It's more than 86 cents or whatever it says next to that. It's probably going to be somewhere, your fringe benefit's going to be somewhere between 30 and 33% of the hourly rate. So you can do the math in your head. If it's an hourly rate of $21.17, your fringe is going to be what, somewhere around $7 and change per hour, something like that. It's going to be somewhere around 33 cents in Broward County for that particular trade in the state of Florida. So you need to look and see where you are within what state and what county or parish, if you're in Louisiana, that you're in, and the trade and the type of work. See where it just gets narrowed down, drilled down until you find the appropriate category. Now, hopefully you've got, it's pretty straightforward and you've got a wage determination for the trade. If you don't have a wage determination for the trade, you can go to the Department of Labor. If you're a HUD recipient, or if you're working with HUD, if you're an Indian Housing Block Grant recipient, HUD does have a Department of Labor office. It has several of them across the country. You can always reach out to the HUD office the region. For us in South Florida, that office was in Atlanta, Georgia, and there was the HUD Department of Labor office was in downtown Atlanta, and the contact there was very helpful to us in answering any questions and in generating any reports that had to be done by us to them. And there are reports that have to be generated to the Department of Labor or to HUD's contact through the Department of Labor. There are reports. She was extremely helpful and pleasant, and and if you're the recipient of the Indian Housing Block Grant and you are mandated to use Davis-Bacon or follow Davis-Bacon legislation with prevailing wage, it behooves you again to use that word. It behooves you again to have a working relationship with HUD's Department of Labor office, depending upon where you're located in the United States. If you're anywhere, I think anywhere east of the Mississippi, it's going to be out of Atlanta like it was for us. But I would strongly suggest that. So let me look at the chat box. I don't see any questions popping up or concerns or shared information. So I'm just going to keep plugging on, move through this. Choosing the right wage determination, critically important. Again, with that wonderful question we had a few moments ago, don't assume that the contractor knows what the rates are. Don't assume that, because you might be, he or she, the contractor might be working in a different county. Your county might be different. To phrase it differently, your county that you're doing the project in might be different than what they're used to. They might be a contractor for the state of Florida, but deal in Palm Beach County or Miami-Dade or somewhere else, and not in Broward, which has its own rates. So you can't assume the contractor knows what the rates are for all the trades. You're going to have to protect your program. I would strongly suggest that you become familiar with what those rates are for all the trades within the county. And if you overlap into different counties on a project, this is where it gets tricky. Now you've got two counties or more with different potential wage rates. So that has to be part of your equation, keeping track of what the wage rates are for the different counties. Perhaps they don't change because you might still be in a larger metropolitan area. But if they do change, even a few pennies, they're different rates, and you might have to have different rates. I'm creating a scenario that sounds horrible, but these are the kind of little things that you, as managers of this program, you've got to be aware of. So keep in mind overlapping, or not overlapping, but working in simultaneously in two different counties within the state, or God forbid you overlap into two different states. Your reservation is part in one state and part of another. Now you've really got an issue with two prevailing wage. They're going to be different because of different state and different county. And again, the only saving grace would be that you're in the same metropolitan area. Like if you were in St. Louis, for example, we've got East St. Louis on the Illinois side, and we've got St. Louis on the other side, a totally different state, but referred to as St. Louis. You know where I'm coming from, that type of thing. And so you've got to be careful of different counties and different states having different rates for construction workers. Okay, questions on that? That was part 2. I think we're doing very, very good. I got to pick up the pace here a little bit. Been going for about an hour now, and I still got a lot of material to cover. I'm going to skip over the quiz. I'll read them. We'll kind of do this together. Are grantees responsible for ensuring compliance? You are the grantee. Are you responsible for ensuring compliance with Davis-Bacon? No, the grantee is responsible. B, partially. The grantee is responsible only for annual report. C, yes, the grantee, you, should work with the contractor to ensure proper payments, et cetera, et cetera. D, all the above. E, only A and B. Well, C, clearly, as I've been saying, is that you really should take control of the situation. Not necessarily the contractor's position, but you need to understand Davis-Bacon legislation, prevailing wage, certified payroll records inside and out. You really got to have a good handle on that, because the repercussions of doing it wrong and having grievances filed against the contractor who's going to get you involved or directly with you is not worth the time and energy. It's just a hassle. So you want to take preemptive, proactive measures to make sure you understand what you're getting into here. And if you're using federal funds and considering or actually doing any type of rehab or construction, that threshold is so low that you're automatically going to trip that trigger, probably for Davis-Bacon. So, you're in a good place learning these insides and outs of Davis-Bacon. Even if the final rule and the changes that they propose don't really have a significant impact on you, they really don't change the mechanics of the legislation, you should really know what what they are and how to, at a minimum, how to navigate through the requirements so you understand. That's the lesson we work with grant managers, for example, in teaching them the updates to the uniform guidance, or how to navigate through the uniform guidance, which is the federal regulations, the 2 CFR Part 200. Knowing how to navigate, understanding the parameters and knowing how to navigate through the related documents is worth its weight in gold. It's 90% of the effort to be able to understand how to navigate, how to find different citations and requirements, and then how to interpret them is the next part. How to understand them, how to interpret them. You can't interpret them if you don't have a baseline understanding. And then once you can interpret them, how to implement them. Not only implement them, but implement them in a way that protects your program and, probably more importantly, fits your program better. So just approaching Davis-Bacon legislation and saying, yeah, we got to do prevailing wage, that's just surface level knowledge. Being able to understand, navigate, interpret, and implement these requirements, that's a higher level. That takes dedication. That takes a real good understanding. And this legislation, even though it hasn't changed much since its original inception back when Nixon was president, hasn't changed much, but you still need to know what role it plays and how the federal regulations, the 2 CFR Part 200, aka uniform guidance, what impact that has on Davis-Bacon requirements. We're already running one area, and that was procurement, right? We talked about having policies and procedures for procurement that are in place that follow the uniform standard guidelines, and that's going to have an impact on Davis-Bacon, right? When you solicit your general contractor through a sealed bid, that's procurement. That's a sealed bid procurement process. So I want to suggest to you folks, you do one other thing. I want to suggest that next time the Native Learning Center offers updates to the uniform guidance, updates to the federal regulations, that you enroll in that course, whether it's a webinar. It's probably going to be a little bit more than a webinar because it's much more comprehensive. It's probably going to be more of a virtual training, if anything, or a face-to-face training on site. And it's going to be probably a day and a half to 2 days, because there's a lot. It'll touch on Davis-Bacon, but you really need to get an understanding, if you don't already, of the federal regulations. It encompasses Davis-Bacon and so much more. Davis-Bacon is just a small part of procurement and expenditures. So when you see opportunities to participate either through webinars, virtual training, or live sessions on updates to the federal regulations, in particular the uniform guidance, please take that course and tell your colleagues to take it. It's vitally, they're going through changes too. They're making changes, and they're much more radical than what we're talking about here. Nothing much here changed. Uniform guidance has significant threshold dollar amount changes. They're taking things out, they're putting things in, they're changing verbiage. Those changes to the uniform guidance are at a much higher, more significant level. Degree of difficulty there, 9 out of 10. Degree of difficulty here with this program, 3 out of 10. Much lower risk factor, very small changes in operation. It's just, getting the knowledge and understanding here. But the uniform guidance, much more in depth, and much more critical to your internal controls and to protecting your program. So I strongly suggest you consider that program. Okay, side by side, part 3 we'll move through quickly. Side by side analysis of where Davis-Bacon is now and what the proposed or what the actual changes happen. And you're going to see most of it is not so much in day-to-day activity. All right, updates. First one, section. Did I jump a slide? Let me go back. Oh gosh. Trigger finger. Side-by-side analysis. In the black print on the middle and left side is where it was. On the right side, final rule in red is changed. This is where I strongly suggest you print this out. You have this. You're not going to find this information as readily available. This is consolidated or abbreviated information. You're not going to find this anywhere unless you want to read a 700-page document by the federal government that includes the changes to all the federal programs. I did that for you. So I would suggest that you get this document, if not now, within the next couple of days, and you print out this document so you have this and you can make a decision if any of these changes have any significant impact. My educated guess is most do not, if any, because they're subtle, and a lot of them are changing you know how you hear in politics sometimes what's called gerrymandering, where they change geographical areas to suit different parties that are in office in a state. The state of Florida has changed its jurisdictions of what constitutes Broward County and what from a geopolitical standpoint. That's called gerrymandering, when they change geographical areas most times to benefit the party that's in power. Well, that's kind of what we have a lot of here, is kind of gerrymandering, but not in a negative sense, not in a political sense. The Davis-Bacon leaders here changed a lot of geographical areas more on a positive note to represent smaller tribes and tribal entities and smaller organizations that are required to use Davis-Bacon, but don't have representation. For example, they don't have prevailing wage in their county because their county is so remote. That happens a lot. So there are no wages, construction wages for that. So what they've done is they've changed geographical areas to try to encompass some of those remote areas. So that's a good thing. They're gerrymandering, to use that political term, but they're not using it for negative or for leveraging. They're doing it to try to help the smaller entities be represented more. So it's a positive thing. That's what we're going to see here in the next few slides. What they call the area, topic 1.2 area. They've changed it. They've expanded. Okay, thank you. Okay, all right. Just looking at the comments again. Okay, area, more prevailing wage rate. Existing talks about 50% worker classification. Now, again, these are more high-end internal classification, moving to a 3-rule, reverts to pre-1982, what they call a 3-step process for situations. Doesn't really affect us on a daily basis. Okay. Fringe benefits. The change in fringe benefits determination process mirrors the changes in the previous. This webinar. Will this webinar slides be available at this present? Was another. Yes. Yes, Yelly. I was just saying that a moment ago. This is all available, and I strongly suggest, because this information is so kind of rare and unique, that you download this presentation and you take a more of a slower paced, methodical, deep dive look at this information to determine if it really has any Sure, any impact on what you do on a daily basis. My educated guess is not going to change your day-to-day routines. A lot of these changes are done at a higher level, changing geographical areas of representation, not so much what we have to do from a compliance standpoint. Unless I come across something, I'm not aware of anything. Scope of consideration, final rule eliminates the ban on mixing rural and metropolitan data. That's not for us. That's a regulation for the Department of Labor, not so much us. Oh, yeah, trigger. State or local rates. They're making some amendments. Again, nothing that's going to have an impact on us on a daily basis. All right. A lot of these changes are being done at much higher levels. Scope of consideration is also at a department level. Building or work, they give some definition here. This is one, take a picture of this slide. I don't know if it makes any difference. Day to day, final rule clarifies that the term building or work includes, now they've added solar panels, wind turbines, not the President Trump's determination of a turbine, but wind turbines in general, broadband installation. Those are new. Those are new words. Think about it. This hasn't changed in years. You know, these legislation for Davis-Bacon was created in the 70s. There's been very little talk. There weren't any wind turbines or broadband installation back in the day. So what they've done here is they've added in new work categories, a few of them. And you could probably make an argument with Wage and Hour Division that if there's a work area that is not reflected in, wind turbines, broadband installation, electric charging for Teslas, and as it says, it's a non-inclusive list. There might be other things that are unique. You can always appeal to the Department of Labor and get that included and get wage rate determinations if you're doing something that's not represented. So as you can see, they're open to that. They're open to unique work situations that didn't exist back even a couple years ago. So they opened up that door for it. And if it applies to you, take advantage of it. And then they do let me go back just for a second. That was building or work. And then this one talks about public work, public building or public work. I'm looking at the red. Public work includes construction activities. I don't see anything significant there. Okay. Definition includes site significant portion of building work. Nothing significant here on the site of work. No radical changes to us. Then basically hasn't changed. Site of work. Flaggers. Okay, they've got this. We're talking, I suppose, highway work here or infrastructure, but nothing dramatic. Finally, okay, material supplier. They've added that in. They define the word material supplier, which, to us, it's been around for a long time, but with Davis-Bacon, material supply companies were not included originally, apparently, in the old legislation. So, or definition. So they've added that. So some, more semantics. A lot of this is semantics. Truck drivers must be paid applicable prevailing wage for all on-site drive time. This might be one that has some impact. I do not know how it affects any of you, but this is 5.2 on site of work, specifically truck drivers. A change here, final rule codifies the department's current guidance that truck drivers employed by contractors and subs must be paid applicable prevailing wage rates for all on-site driving time, unrelated to off-site delivery. Okay, so that's different. You can do a deeper dive if you wish on 5.2 if you want to learn a little bit more about that. Again, this is kind of an abbreviated or abridged version of the final rule there. Labor or mechanic, aka journey level person. I don't call them mechanics, I call them journey. That's just my nomenclature. Clarifies considering whether a survey crew. Okay, they've added surveying. into mechanic level. Okay, all right. Okay, so survey crews are now included. Oops. And record keeping, very, very. Now, let me point something out to you here. Record keeping. Final rule clarifies distinction between regular payrolls and other basic records that contractors must make and maintain. Let's talk about, we talked about the regular payroll, the certified payroll records, right? Those are going to be part of prevailing wage. You've got to keep those like you would any other payroll document. Now, the other basic records, you need to know. We're gonna cross-reference here. We're gonna go over to the uniform guidance, the super circular, the 2 CFR Part 200, whatever you want to call it. The uniform guidance is what I call it. Has a regulation. You can look it up yourself on record retention. It says 3 years. 1, 2, 3, 3 years. That is not changing. But personally, a 3-year requirement for the retainage of records, whether electronic or hard copy, in my humble opinion, is not long enough. It's not long enough. Look what the IRS requires of us with our 1040s and our personal tax returns. What's the record keeping requirement there? Doesn't it start at like 7 years and go up depending upon the type, how sophisticated your return is? If you've got investments, it's more like 20 or 25 or even 30 years. So even let's drill down here. Let's trickle this down to what we're doing. The federal guidelines say for other basic records or just record keeping in general, 3-year requirement. But folks, that, in my opinion, is just not long enough. It's really not. At the rate that the federal agencies are doing program reviews, they're lagging behind. They don't have the manpower to keep up. Neither does the IRS, for that matter. That's why audits are down lower than they've ever been in decades. Same thing with our federal agencies. They don't have the time or energy. So that forces us to keep our records for a longer period of time before activity is closed out. So we've got regular payroll records that meet, even if they're certified, they're still payroll records and they got to be treated like payroll records, but they play a dual purpose. They're also compliance records that must be maintained with all of our other compliance documents for a period longer than what the Fed, in my opinion, longer than the federal requirement of 3 years. So you can see it if you read through there, it says 3 years in the bottom of that second paragraph. Not long enough. Not long enough. And trust me, not long enough to keep those records. And the other trend now is moving from hard, if you don't know this, you should, moving from hard copy to electronic record keeping. The medical industry did it years ago with electronic medical records, EMR. It's been around for a long time in the medical industry. The hotel industry is doing that. And now our industry is doing that. And so the 3-year requirement for record retention just isn't nearly enough. And we're also moving towards more electronic record keeping. So records can be kept in perpetuity, basically, if you're moving towards electronic, which would certainly meet the requirement. Hope that makes sense. All that talk about record retention. The other thing here, since you're using federal funds, let's talk about the elephant in the room, at least from my standpoint as a compliance director, and that is the protection of what's called personally identifiable information. You've got, again, this is more on the compliance side. It's more on the uniform guidance. 2 CFR Part 200 says you've got to have policies and procedures in place that protect personally identifiable information if you're using federal funds. So let's put 2 and 2 together. If you're using federal funds for Davis-Bacon issues and construction, you've got certified payroll records that identify people. They've probably got names. They might have social security numbers. They have some kind of contact information. You're going to have mechanisms in place, policies and procedures that protect that information. So it plays, again, a dual role. We've got 2 sets of regulations here. We've got Davis-Bacon legislation and we've got NAHASDA and its regulations through the uniform guidance. And not just NAHASDA. This goes beyond housing. This could be any agency where you're using federal funds. You've got the uniform guidance, which applies to any organization and any federal agency that uses federal funds. So we've got a double-edged sword here that we're working on, and record retention and personally identifiable information are just two of those areas. Again, strongly suggest you take that course or webinar or training on updates to the uniform guidance. If you receive federal funds, you need that training. Trust me, you really need it. It's a good course. Final rule codifies longstanding positions. Certified payroll records may be requested, and federal agencies must produce certified payroll records. And that's the agency, and that's us. The agencies have access to them, and you need to provide them. Okay, that's part 3. So what I'm going to try to do, unless you have questions, is finish here, and the few minutes I might overlap a little bit in past 3:30. I'm going to try to wrap it up. Quiz 2. When was the last time the regulations issued under Davis-Bacon and Relatives Act were updated? During the Biden administration, during the Trump administration, during Obama or Bush or Clinton or Reagan administration, going all the way back to 1980, right after Jimmy Carter. Oh my gosh, which one is it? Yeah, believe it or not. Berlin Wall, knock that wall down. And while you're doing that, let's revise Davis-Bacon. That was 10 years old by that time. Yeah, the Reagan administration back in 1980, way back in the day. Probably some of you weren't even born then. You know, those of us of a certain age remember that. I'm kidding. Okay, part 4. Let's finish up here. Compliance. We got just a few things. This should be perfect. There should be no overlapping of time here. Bear with me. Compliance, and take a look at certified payroll records if you've never seen one. Okay, compliance. We've been talking about compliance. This is all from my perspective. You know, my whole focus here has been from a compliance standpoint, from an operational standpoint. Determine, before construction, some startup points here. Before construction, determine if it's Davis-Bacon applicable. Probably is if you're anywhere near $2,000. It's such a low dollar threshold. Second, make a list or check it twice. You do the research yourself to find out before you even go out to solicit for a general contractor, if that's the path you're going to take, what the general labor classifications are going to be. The normal ones are going to be there. You're going to have heavy equipment operators, probably, including backhoe and crane, maybe. You're going to have your carpenters, your rough carpenters out there. You're going to have electrician, plumbing, maybe sheet metal, roofers, laborers to start with. So figure out at the beginning where you're going to be doing your project, what state, that's going to be easy, what county you're going to be in, and even what municipality or city. Municipality is what you might have to look for. But then go to the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division and do a quick search on what those trades are going to require payment per hour. You know, probably starting anywhere at $20 an hour up to $45 an hour, depending upon the trade, like electricians and heavy equipment operators, crane operators in particular, tend to be at the top of the pecking order when it comes to hourly pay, and also find out what their fringe benefit is per dollar. So you know, and print that out, have that available, because at some point you're going to have to post that information on the job site. You're going to have to make if the general contractor that you select through your procurement mechanism isn't aware, then you're going to have to bring him or her up to speed. And they're going to have it posted on the site the same way that they've got to have OSHA posters posted on site for safety. You know, same thing. They've got to have safety posters posted up in a predominant area that can be seen by everyone, and that makes sense. But they've also got to see the prevailing wage up there too. That is mandatory. So you might as well go through that motion and be aware of what those rates are. So you have leverage. You know what you're talking about when you finally select a general contractor and you say, oh, or put it out in your bid that it's going to be prevailing wage. And, and then when they come in for the sealed bid opening, if that still applies to tribes, a sealed bid opening to the public, they're talking about eliminating that in the uniform guidance regulations. But anyway, when it comes time to open up those bids, then you can say we have a pretty good understanding of where these rates are going to be for the trades, because we've already done our research with wage and hour division. We know what a carpenter is going to make $21.87 per hour plus 33% for a base rate plus time and a half if you work them on weekends, double time for holidays. You can do the math. You can have an idea what you're talking about and look like you know what Davis-Bacon is all about. Indicate the bid amount, indicate in the bid documents when you first go out for general contractor that the contractor is covered by Davis-Bacon, probably for spending more than $2,000 and not less than the wages included. You can tell them, in the bid notice that it is Davis-Bacon. You don't have to tell them what the rate is. You can save that for after the fact, after you select. Before construction, verify the contractor and all the subs, review the project documents, conduct pre-construction conferences. These are things you want to do before the shovel hits the ground, so to speak. After, my feelings on the three, it says best 7. I would even doubt that 7 years is going to do it these days. Where do we find labor classifications? Department of Labor, good question. Who asked that? Anna, good question. Department of Labor, Division of Hour and Wage. So go to the Department of Labor, dol.gov, find the Division of Wage and Hours, which is a subcategory of Department of Labor, Division of Hour and Wage. And then once you get in there, you should be able to find wage determinations. From there, I showed just a couple slides ago how to go through and select by trade, by state, by county, what the wage rates would be. But that's where you go, wage and hour division of the Department of Labor. Okay, good question. Thank you for bringing that back up, because a lot of people don't know where to go to get it. All right. Ensure availability for audit and review. Keep in mind, you're going to be audited for all of this stuff because you're using federal funds. So it behooves you to do it correctly. Here's what a certified, unless they change it, here's what a certified payroll record looks like. It's a single page document, but obviously there's only about eight blocks in there, and your general contractor might have 42 employees. So page 2, page 3, page 4 is going to look exactly the same. These days, it's a fillable PDF form that they fill in. It's pretty straightforward. It should have the name of the worker, that's the far left, center and bottom far left, and then the work classification, the type of work, and then that block in the middle is going to be it is the hours of the day, and then everything to the right is going to be your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday type thing. It needs to be signed off by someone of authority within either the general contractor, probably a representative of the general contractor. It should make its way to you. You should look at it. As the compliance director, I mandated that I receive them. I looked at them. I signed off on them to make sure that they were accurate. And then I put a compliance memo with them on a week, all of them combined, on a weekly basis, that they've been reviewed. And for all practical purposes, I'm not the general contractor, but for all practical purposes, they look to be accurate, and I signed off on it, and I kept a copy, and there's still a copy in the records, even though that was done in 2014. We still maintain those records. How can we print off the materials from this webinar? Download it would be on the bottom left. You've got some files. That's a good question, Alicia. Or you can wait a couple days. I'll tell you what, Elisa's going to close out in a minute, and she'll tell you how to access that information better than I can, because she deals with it every day. But you can download this information. I strongly suggest you download this PowerPoint and the attachments that come with it to bring it so you can do a deeper dive on all of this Davis-Bacon stuff. And that's it. That's it. That's everything. Unless you have questions, that is it. Whoop, did I get ahead of myself? I'm done. I'm going to turn it back over to Native Learning Center, where we stand in particular to close out. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat box.
Thank you, Vince. You did an incredible job.
Thank you.
I went ahead and launched the survey, and then I'm just going to go ahead and let everyone know how to print off the materials real quick. So if you hover over the files, you should see a little arrow pointing downwards, or you can click the file and you should also get the same image. It's an arrow pointing downwards. If you click that, it will download. If you go into your download section, you should be able to print off of there. If you need help, any further assistance, please let me know, and I'd be more than happy to email it to you if this is not working. Please don't forget to go ahead and let us know what you thought of today's webinar. The feedback helps Vince know what you guys would like to know more of next time and anything we can improve on. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. Our next webinar is going to be March 14th. It is going to be Business Planning for Business Success. It is going to be presented by Russ Siegel, Executive Director of Sequoia Fund. As always, registration is free. It'll be from 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska time. This recording, and all of our other webinar recordings, can be accessed on our website at www.nativelearningcenter.com under the Recorded Catheta Webinar tab. That's where you'll find all of our recorded webinars. If you need any help finding this webinar, please let me know, and I would be more than happy to send you the link. Go ahead and check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We also have a podcast called Hope a Thing, a Native American Podcast, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you on the next webinar. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.